Hey guys, this is a tutorial for 9.0, the cool new update that came out in Wings of Glory and introduced lots of planes. Turns out, though, a lot of people aren't really familiar with all of the new mechanics, and so I'm going to teach them to you now. Now, there is a tutorial that the game introduces you to upon entering a new tier, so tiers 6, 7, and 8. And it teaches you about the new mechanics that you'll encounter there. But unfortunately, many people either don't read them or don't really understand them. They are text based, they don't really offer any kind of um, interactive uh, learning, so you can't really learn on the go, or it's very difficult to do that. So, with all of these new planes, it can feel a little overwhelming in combination with all of the new mechanics. So I'm going to try to take it down into a bit of a bite-sized uh, package here today. Please note that this will just be covering tier 8, um, although it will also apply to lower tiers such as tier 7 with several mechanics like notching and the radar. Um, just because tier 8 is a lot easier. It has everything, so I can cover everything in one go um, without too much complication. So keep that in mind. Okay, so the first question that we keep receiving is, which plane should I get? Now, it's a good question. You don't want to spend all of your hard-earned coins on a plane that won't serve you well, but in tier 8, most of them perform generally just as good as all the rest. Um, Now that's given that it's all beyond visual range combat in tier 8, so it all comes down to the missiles, and most of them have the AIM 120C5 or similar, and that's sort of like the general good missile. The exceptions being like the F-16, the Rafale, um, and the Soviet planes, as well as the Japanese ones. But anything else has the 120C5s as the like best ARH missile. Um, but we'll take a look at all of them. Starting with the F-15C, very good plane. 8 120C5s if you want, a good amount of chaff, the best radar probably in game. Um, Access to AIM-9X, which is a reliable IR, good exclusion zone of maybe like 17 kilometers or so. Basically means if anyone gets within that range, you can just pop one off, and unless they run away, as they should, it should hit pretty easily. Extremely good flare resistance for a missile, so you wouldn't have much issue getting that kill. F-16CM Block 50, my personal favorite. Access to the AIM 120C7s, arguably, or not even arguably, undeniably the best missile in the game. It's got good flight performance, not as amazing of a radar as the F-15, but a good thrust to weight ratio, um, and very nimble, good RWR, and it can carry air to ground ordnance, so you're not going to have too much issue um, uh, doing anything in the F-16, and it's also just a neat plane. The F-14V Tomcat, uh, the cheapest tier 8, I think, so it serves as a pretty good gateway into the tier. It doesn't have access to the AIM 9Xs, is the first thing you might notice when looking at the armament. Um, it so that does mean at the closer ranges it will probably get destroyed pretty easily. But it does its best at longer ranges because of the AIM 54 Phoenix. The Phoenix missiles are the longest ranged active radar homing missiles in the game, I believe. Uh, and they don't give opponents much time to react because they activate at about 12 kilometers away from the target. So overall, uh, they're a great beginner friendly missile. They can't really multitask though, as in it requires the plane to tell it when to activate the radar on board. So you do need to keep your target locked pretty much all the way, is the issue. So you can't just willy nilly nor launch all of your uh, active radar homing missiles like you could on the F-16, F-15, or FA-18, or most of the other planes for that matter. But other than that, it's a perfectly fine plane. A good starter for any people new to the tier, but don't expect it to dominate because it won't. Now on to the FA-18C Hornet. This plane is a perfect multi-role fighter. It can carry pretty much anything except for rockets, I believe. Yeah, as you can see in the ordnance list, it can carry bombs, IR missiles, ARH missiles, and semi-active radar homing, SARH. Um, it's got an alright radar, but I think the main thing people like to use the missiles for are actually just the spam ram tactic, which is a fun little joke where you launch 10 different AIM 120C5s at an enemy and hope one of them hits. Um, don't do that, it's not that effective. They can all be defeated pretty much together, and uh, any skilled player knows pretty much what to do there, and then you're also wasting all of your missiles. Instead, I would recommend just running less than the maximum of 12 missiles, 10 120C5s and 2 9Xs, and instead just go for maybe 8 total. Um, I mean, feel free to carry 10, just know that your plane is going to be slow. Very slow. In fact, in some cases, it can't even exceed Mach 1, which is terrible. You are going to take a long time to get to the battlefield, and then you're going to just die pretty easily um, because your plane can hardly maneuver. Uh, it's got the same amount of countermeasures. I don't remember if it pops them as one or two. So you've either got 30 or 60 pops of countermeasures. Either way, fairly survivable. But other than that, there's honestly, in my opinion, not that much that's special about the Hornet. Um, it's still reliable, but I would just use it um, for lugging around AIM 120C5s and a couple 9Xs and see where it gets me. Not quite as exciting as many of the other planes in the game. Then we move on to the British tree um, with the Eurofighter Typhoon. Now, it's important to note that this plane and the Tier 8 in the German tree are pretty much identical, the only difference being the ASRAM versus the Iris T. Uh, Otherwise, I'm pretty sure they're just identical. Just get whichever one you prefer. Like, do you like the ASRAM or do you like the IRS-T? That's like the only real decider. In terms of the Eurofighter, um, carries AIM 120C5s and the ASRAM. It's got good avionics and it's got good flight performance. But I think one of the places where it stands out is the amount of chaff it has. 320 uh, chaff for days. You're not going to run out of it unless you spam it too much. Don't try to run out of it because you do need it. Um, but just make sure that remember you remember to use it as often as possible without wasting it. Otherwise, it's a good plane. I would personally recommend it. Uh, you should have plenty of fun playing it. But I'll move on to the next one, the Tornado F3. I don't have a lot to say about this one because it's not one I have a terribly great amount of experience with. I didn't test it that often. Um, but we have a similar loadout to the Eurofighter Typhoon with AIM 120C5s and ASRAM IR missiles. But one of the interesting parts about the Tornado is it requires chaff pods. As you'll notice, it does not have any chaff. It only has 32 flares. You need those chaff pods. Uh, Not having chaff in Tier 8 is an instant death sentence. Um, of course, you might be thinking, I can just notch the missiles. Not really. Several of the better ARH missiles, such as the AIM 120B and AIM 120C5, just most of them for that matter, as well as the air radars, require both notching and chaff. So you do need that chaff pod. Uh, Make sure to take it in, do not forget it, or you'll just be a sitting duck. Otherwise, the Tornado, I can't say much about its actual avionics. It's alright in terms of flight performance. It doesn't have a thrust to weight ratio over 1, so you will struggle a bit with that. Um, Otherwise, I can't say much about it. I haven't played it enough. It is good though. I have heard good things about it. I can vouch in that regard. French Tree, Mirage 2005F. Um, Honestly, if I'm gonna be completely honest, this might annoy some people, but I'm just gonna say it's just a worse Rafale C. Um, uh, it's faster, has a higher top speed, but it has less chaff by a small amount, and you also um, probably don't have quite as good of a radar. I would imagine it's a bit of an upgrade. I haven't actually tested all of this, but if you have the Rafale C, go with that instead. But this should suffice, honestly. Um, Despite what it looks like, you don't actually have to buy the Mika IRs. You start with both the Magic 2 and the IR. Um, the Mika EM, it's quite draggy, so it might end up that your main armament actually becomes the Mika IR. Um, uh, Also, forgive me if I'm pronouncing that name incorrectly. Micah, I've heard it said both ways. But overall, you're not going to experience much of an issue with either of them. Just that be careful with the range. It's slightly outranged by several other active radar homing missiles, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, pretty good planes. Alright, on to the USSR planes. This is an interesting spot for the planes because here we're faced with three Well, not amazing aircraft, to say the least. To be blunt about it, even. With the Su-27 Flanker B, everyone loves the Su-27. It's just that, well, for starters, it doesn't have any Fox 3 missiles. No ARH. It's stuck with the R-27ER and it doesn't get any better. Not to mention, it has a terrible RWR. The SPO-15 doesn't give very detailed information. It's not 360 like pretty much every other plane that's not USSR Soviet. And that's actually a shared trait with the other two as well. It's not much better in the IR section either. The R-27ET has less range. It's 20 kilometers, which is pretty good for front aspect, but it doesn't maneuver and it won't save you from the incoming AIM 120 threat. Now, that's not to say it's impossible to do well on this, it's just you need a pretty good understanding of the mechanics of the game and a pretty good understanding of how to dogfight. Um, you're not going to get super far, if I'm going to be honest. I tried during testing to, like, overcome the BVR situation while in both a flanker and a fulcrum, and it's not easy. Um, but I'm not trying to discourage anyone who does want to use them. If you like the plane and think you'll have fun with it, go ahead. Nothing's stopping you. I'm just giving this warning to say that it's don't expect it to perform quite like an F-16 would. Um, the MiG 31B Foxhound actually might be your best bet in the Soviet tree. It's fitted with both the R-77 ARH missile, not amazing, but it does its job, and the R-33 SARH missile. Um, the R-33 paired with the MiG-31 is actually not bad. It has a silent lock, a silent launch, and so people actually won't know that they've had an R-33 launched at them. Um, the drawback for the MiG-31 is terrible maneuverability and only 12 chaff, no flares either. It's purely an interceptor, so don't expect to do any good dogfighting in it. Very high max speed, wahoo. It's just you can't really use it, so it doesn't mean a lot. Um, Otherwise, uh, honestly, I probably would use it over these two if I was actually looking for performance. I mean, of the three USSR planes, I'd probably choose the Su-27 just because I do think it looks pretty nice, but I would not choose it if I wanted to do well. The MiG-29S Fulcrum C, it's at the end of the tree. It's the last plane in all of the Soviet tech tree, but unfortunately, that doesn't mean it's necessarily the best. It doesn't perform very well. The R-77s are subpar, to be honest, and it still has the SPO-15 RWR, and it's not going to take you super far. Alternatively, you could try to use the R-27ERs and R-27ETs, but there's not a lot you can do, to be honest. I'm not going to spend too much time going over these three in any more detail because, well, since testing, I haven't touched them at all. So, um, all I can say is that they're probably the worst at tier 8 at the moment. One thing of note, though, is that there will in the future be the Su-35, which will come after the Su-27. That will be okay. It will be good. It it will have R-37s and R-77-1s, I believe. You can check that all on the Trello for the development, which is in the info resources channel in the Discord. I'll also post a link in the description, so keep that in mind. That will be one reason to get the Su-27, but for now, the USSR does not look very appealing for Tier 8 players. On to Germany. The F2000 Block 10. I've already mentioned that it's pretty much identical to the British tree. I'll just reiterate once again, its one difference is the Iris-T IR missile instead of the ASRAAM. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same. Still a very good plane, 320 chaff, as I said, AIM-120C5. You'll still have fun with it. Onto the final tree. Japanese planes. At Tier 8 you have two options, the F2A Viper Zero and the F-15J Eagle. You'll notice that both of these are pretty much counterparts to the F-16CM and the F-15C respectively. That is one of the issues, is that these are not better than the US counterparts. In fact, the F-15J is quite a bit worse. The F2A Viper Zero, it has access to the data link, which is good, but it only has the AM4. I believe it turns slightly better than the F-16C, 30.2 versus 30.9. Not that much of an improvement, but something. Unfortunately, though, that doesn't mean much in the face of armament. The AM4 is the biggest problem here. It is a very underperforming missile for a NATO country, unfortunately. It lets down both the F2A and the F-15J, and prevents them from truly performing to their best. The F-15J Eagle, it's in a pretty sorry state, I'd say. It does share that highest thrust-to-weight ratio with the F-15C. It's got all of those performance stats and all the avionics. But unfortunately, it does have a slightly worse radar than the F-15C, so it doesn't share that APG-63 V3, but it's just got the V1. And unfortunately, one of the other big problems with it is the data link. It just has the F-15J link. It can only talk to and communicate with the F2A. This is a problem because it means you will not be able to see most of the enemy targets that your friends can see. This will leave you largely underinformed and at a pretty big disadvantage as a result. But with that done, that's all of the planes, and we can get on to the actual mechanics. Okay, so now I'm going to teach you about how to use the radar. The radar is one of the key aspects to BVR combat, as it allows you to launch missiles beyond the range of IR missiles. The first step to using the radar is to know how to lock. To select a person to lock, you must first move your mouse towards the person you want to lock, or so that they are the nearest one to your mouse. Say I want to lock this person. I move my mouse to them and I press X once. Now they are soft locked by my radar. This means I've locked them, but they are not being told that they are locked by their RWR, hence the soft lock. In order to do a full STT lock, I double tap X instead, represented by the two double squares. This means they are now being told that I am locking them. This would allow me to launch SARH missiles instead. If I'm launching an ARH missile, I just want to use a soft lock. It's time to teach you about how to use missiles. When using missiles, it is in your best interest to climb as high as possible. These small octagons represent data link targets. They are targets that my teammates' radars have already seen. However, I cannot lock them with my radar. As you can see, it instead locks this person. In order to use my radar missile, I have to have them locked in at least a soft track or an STT lock, and then press space to launch. Now the missile is tracking, and you can see the small green dot to the left of the square. I can change target and launch a different missile to launch at two simultaneous targets. As you can see, the green dot remains there until the target may die or lose lock. Come on! Ha! In order to know when to launch a missile, I need to look at my bar on the right. The top of the bar, the first notch, tells me the maximum range of the missile. This assumes the target is flying towards you at max speed with minimal maneuvering. The second notch shows the no escape zone, where the target cannot, under any circumstances, outrange the missile. Once they hit the bar, I will launch my missile. The missile has been launched. So now I'm going to talk about the RWR, a handy instrument which tells you where you're being locked from. As you can see on my RWR, I've got a few different planes locking me from my front. I can't read any of them because they're all on top of each other, but I've also got this F-14 showing up from behind because it's locking me from there. As you can see there, it says F-14, and it's also showing it close within that inner circle because of how close they are. Different RWRs do this in different ways, but generally they'll try to show distance as well as direction in all 360 degrees. Unfortunately, I cannot teach you about every single RWR that is in the game, so I highly suggest that you do a bit of research of your own plane's RWR so that you know how to effectively use it. So now I'll teach you about how to effectively defend against missiles. The best way to do this in Tier 8 is to notch and chaff. Essentially, a lot of confusion arises from what notching is. Notching is simply a process of maneuvering your plane so that a radar or an air radar or a missile radar cannot see you. In Tier 8, most radars, or rather all radars, use Doppler filters. What this means is they see targets based on their relative velocity. For example, a plane that is moving towards the radar is picked up over a plane that is moving away from the radar. With this knowledge, you can now identify that notching is the process of making your plane seem like it has no relative velocity, as though it was moving at 0 meters per second relative to the radar of your enemy. Here's an example. Let's say that these planes on my RWR are attacking missiles. If I want to notch these missiles, I need to turn either to the left or to the right 90 degrees. So in this scenario, I'm going to turn to the left. And now that they're lined up with the right hand side of my RWR, I've finished notching. This means I am now flying perpendicular to those two incoming missiles. Once I've started doing that, I can now start deploying my chaff. Oh, actually, here's a real missile. I've lined it up with the side of my RWR and I'm deploying chaff. And then I have successfully defeated the missile. This should work against pretty much every radar in Tier 8. And this is how you go cold, which is another way of saying running away. And if all else fails, you can also use the terrain to avoid missiles, using mountains or other high objects to avoid radar detection. Now I'm using the terrain in order to evade the missiles for good. And as you can see, that appears to have worked. On this RWR, it is a bit more difficult than usual to properly notch, because you don't have any markers on the side of your RWR. And as you can see, that is a missile now tracking me, a couple missiles even, but these have lines so I can notch them effectively. I'm just going to spam my chaff so that I can get them out of the way, because as you know, I have a lot of chaff, as I mentioned earlier in the video. Now these are two missiles coming from different directions, so I don't actually know which one to prioritize. But I'm doing my best. I believe it's passed, but yeah, I'm not going to stop until it's definitely dealt with. And I'll launch some C5s in retaliation. And I'm then going to crank, and that just means notching while guiding missiles. This will also force my other enemies to also go defensive, unless they also feel like dying, which the F-14 apparently does. Unless not. Impressive. That F-16 was not so lucky. gonna see if I can get a kill with my... Oh, that might have been a mistake. Still tracking. There we go. Let me get a kill with my ass run. That's almost definitely killed. Yeah. Hopefully they don't realize. There we go. And that is winning the round and getting MVP. A good 48 UP in one game. And that concludes all the content for this tutorial for 9.0. Hopefully it wasn't too boring and actually helped you out with some of your troubles. It was a bit hastily put together, so unfortunately I wouldn't have covered everything. If you have any additional questions, feel free to ask. I was just covering all of the frequently asked ones. But if you do still wonder about anything, I'd gladly answer. Thanks for watching, and here are some bonus gameplay clips. Zoinks! Oh, okay. Wait, why am I... The M120Cs are so easy.